we are talking to Apolo Ohno today. Very, very excited. We've been waiting for this, our chance to get in a virtual room with him. We were going to try to do this in person, but you know, the way things are nowadays, it doesn't always work out like that. So we're so excited to have you, Apolo. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Hey, tell me, I know you are a famed Winter Olympian. We're going to talk a lot about winter sports, but what's your favorite summer Olympic sport to watch?
Track and field.
Track and field, and then
Yeah,
who's your favorite summer?
Most of the sprints, it's like 100 meters. Yeah.
Yeah. They're exciting, right?
They're exciting, and I like it's very high pressure, right? You've got like an entire like sport career on the line for a race that lasts like 9.5 seconds. It's pretty crazy,
Right.
actually.
Well, kind of like yours, your event.
Kind of like mine. But
Yeah.
mine's 40 seconds long or something.
So ridiculous.
That's crazy. You train your whole life for 40 seconds.
Right? I know in the what did you say in your documentary? It's like this, the time it takes for 2 claps. That's like the difference in who crosses the line, and then 2 claps later, the second person crosses the line, and that's the difference between winning and losing, or first and second. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's the Olympic path.
Yeah.
It's a dedication. I mean, but it's not that unlike a lot of other things, I think, in life. They just don't feel as visceral or real because the world's not potentially watching.
Right.
But, a lot of times, like a lot of things teeter on the brink of one particular moment, one day, one opportunity. I think the Olympics is slightly different because it's just like one race, right?
Yes.
Or one half pipe final, or,
Yeah.
one
Totally.
wrestling match. It's
Right.
either like go into obscurity or like you rise to stardom. It's pretty wild.
Oh. And that's what I can't wait to talk to you about. So I'm so excited we're going to do this. Thank you for that. I am Laura Cathcart-Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey.
I'm actually downstairs, Apollo, if you didn't know.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So we're in the same room. Yeah, yeah.
We're in
You
the
stay
same
down
room.
there, Scott. You
I
stay
know,
down there.
I know my space, man. I know my space.
We're talking again to Apolo Ohno. He is America's most decorated Winter Olympian of all time. He is an author. He is a speaker on a life mission to help you become your best in health, work, and life. And he is real about that. There's just so much right with this brother right here. So we're going to talk to him about all of that. First, I want to ask you, Apolo, how do you identify?
How do I identify? I guess I identify as a he, him.
Okay. So I also want to give a shout out before we start to Ben Leyland, who connected us so generously. Shout out to Ben. Thank you so much. As soon as he just began to talk about the possibility of connecting us so that you could be on the show, I was all over him. And I think I must have texted him back like 10 times in a minute, like, yes, please, when can this happen? And he made it happen. So shout out to Ben. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Ben's had his own kind of hard pivots in his life, which is cool to see.
Yes.
So really proud of him for. I don't know Ben like super well, but Ben used to work at one of my friend's companies, and that's how we were introduced. And so I know he recently took another hard pivot, and he's pursuing a life that is it's really cool. It's helping a lot of people. So his integration with the work in down there in SoCal.
It is indeed, and I'm so glad that you mentioned Heart Pivot, which is the name of your new book, and we're going to be talking about that too. Such an appropriate title for right now too. I think people are probably mad that you got that title and they didn't get it before you.
It's still available. You
No.
can put them side by side.
All right. So you were raised by your father, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And so I want to hear a little bit about that, what that was like, and then talk to me about speed skating, and then how old were you when you started training?
So I was raised in the Pacific Northwest in the Seattle region. My father, being a Japanese immigrant, came to this country, no money, no English speaking skills in any capacity, began his life, struggled immensely. I was born kind of in the middle of his call it his own pursuit in the arts, I always say, because he was actually cutting hair.
Ah,
And my life began. I was a really rambunctious kid. My dad decided to take full custody of me, so he raised me single-handedly throughout my kind of very early formative years, and saw that I had a unique talent for sports and athletics in general. I played traditional American stick and ball sports. I did all things, but there was a sport that really stuck out when I saw it, and it was in 1992 and again in 1994, and that was the sport of short track speed skating. I'd never seen anything like it before in the past, and yeah, it's a sport that was just, it was fascinating, right? These athletes are skating around at these like absurd speeds, leaning over at impossible angles. It didn't look real. And a part of that didn't look real was also the fact that I was 12 years old. And as a 12-year-old, like you're fascinated with comic book characters, or at least like superhero figures, right? And so when I looked at these athletes, my dad drove me from Seattle to Vancouver, BC, which was in Canada, which is about 2.5 hours north of us in Seattle. And I got to see my first ever short track speed skating competition and race. And that's when I actually really fell in love. It was, I'd never seen anything else like it in my life. It was fascinating. And they looked like superhero figures, like on the ice, because, you know, the way that my brain processed like what was happening, these like samurai swords that were strapped to their feet, it was just so cool. So that's how I fell in love with the sport. And then to take you further, people always ask, well, how do you like choose this sport to go to the Olympics? And I say that I didn't necessarily choose it. I think it was a combination of my dad pushing me in that direction, and the sport somewhat chose me. I definitely had a unique talent and skill for the sport, and what we call like the feel of the ice. So, you know, you put on these foreign objects onto your feet that look like shoes, they're carbon fiber, and then attached to them, drilled into the bottom, is this, you know, metal structure, which is your blade. So there's a pretty big disconnect from your actual sole of your foot to the ice.
right.
But I had this ability where I got on and it felt very natural. Like it felt like there was no separation. Like I could dance on the ice almost immediately. And so my father saw that. I started enrolling in these local competitions. Scouts, what we have, like these like junior development scouts that exist inside speed skating, were starting to take notice because of my performance. I was winning races quite easily at a really young age and beating some of the Canadian skaters that were actually training in clubs, but I had no formalized training structure or coach besides my dad. And then I was invited to be a part of a junior Olympic training program in upstate New York in an area called Lake Placid, which was the home of the 1980 Winter Olympic Games. And to fast forward the story even further, I was accepted into this program at the age of 14. I was shipped off by my dad, almost like boarding school. And I started training for the Olympics. And that's how
Wow.
my career began.
I'm so fascinated by all of that. I'm really like, how did your dad know how to train you? Like, did he?
I don't think
'cause
he
it wasn't
did.
like,
I don't think he
but
did. Let's be honest. I think he thought he did. So my dad. I think someone who comes to this country who doesn't speak the language feels very alien that's here and has to struggle for like a decade just to figure out how to assimilate.
yeah,
That philosophical approach and DNA definitely was embedded into me. Not in terms of, I obviously spoke English, but the hard work and the perseverance and the grit and the work ethic was associated. And he really showed me so a lot of times by force. And what I mean by that is like people ask, well, like, doesn't Seattle rain all the time? Like, this is back when I was like roller skating. I used to go to the local roller skating rink when I was like 11, 10, 11, 12 years old. And, you know, Friday and Saturday nights, this is the place that your parents would drop you off because they know that you're staying in one location. It's a
right.
safe place where your kids can play. And I used to get dropped off and I would always, you know, participate in like, okay, everybody, it's like the speed skate time. And then for like 2 minutes, you like play like fast music and you just skate around. There's like no track or anything in this like roller skating rink, right? Like wearing quad skates or inline skates. And then I joined the local speed skating team in that arena. And my dad saw that he didn't have time to take me to practice and be a part of that team. So I had to practice on my own if I wanted to actually go and perform at the same level that other athletes did. And so he would wake me up at like 3:30, 4:30 in the morning and take me to these empty school and church parking lots when I was like
Wow.
12 years old. And he put a miner's light like on my helmet. And we had like an old Volkswagen Rabbit, you know,
Yeah.
that he would like keep the lights on. And I'd be skating around in this like church parking lot.
That's
I had no
amazing.
idea what I was doing. He didn't know having to do what he was doing. He just thought like, well, we just have to work hard. Like that's the
Right.
only process. So that's why his
Wow.
joke. Yeah.
No, that's incredible. And well, I've heard a lot about the sacrifices that the Olympic athletes make, the athletes themselves. I haven't heard a lot about the sacrifice that the parents make for those athletes. And I would imagine, being that he was in full charge of you and your training, and also I'm assuming putting food on the table, that must have been a lot for him. He must have really believed in you and that dream that you could, parlay this into something really meaningful, right?
I think my dad had an unequivocal, unwavering belief that I was going to do extraordinary things in my life. I
Yeah.
don't know why he thought
Uh,
that. I think a lot of parents look at their kids and they see something really special. My dad really, really did his best to tell me over and over again that anything was possible, but
mm,
also that there was this, just kind of this unique philosophical and psychological process that he gave me. He also believed that because we didn't come from a family that had a lot of resources and opportunity per se, uh, that I had to work twice as hard effectively. Not like exactly, but I'm just kind of being,
yeah.
giving an example. And so that was embedded, that this idea that I was always a little bit behind, that I was always a
Mm-hmm.
little bit at a disadvantage, made me
Yeah.
do the things and stick to it with the levels of consistency later on in my life and career that didn't let me waver or even have a single day of my entire training career where I thought about not going to training. If you can
Wow.
believe that, for like 15 years, 15, 16, 17 years straight, there wasn't a single day from when I made my mind up, and I decided to begin, this process, that I was thinking, I didn't even give that voice a vote. In fact, I don't even think that voice even came into my mind.
That's
I just was
amazing.
so much in pursuit because of this both fear of failure that existed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then also you
Yes.
combine that with this idea around just like, I don't have the luxury of staying back today. I'm so far
Mm-hmm.
behind, even when I was winning. And that's why it's kind of strange, right? Like this like insatiable desire. So it can be a very powerful and motivating tool. It can also be somewhat toxic if it really starts to handcuff you in a way,
Yeah.
to be tied to those results as your, definition of being happy, fulfilled, and success. So
Mm-hmm. Well, I also like it's like when really wealthy people still operate from a scarcity mindset, right?
yeah,
It's one of the things that keeps them really wealthy. So one of the things that kept you at the top of your game was the idea that there was no room for failure and that
yeah.
you had to work that hard. I want to just talk about a little bit about what it looked like to us, the fans of the Winter Olympics, your fans in particular. You were this young, handsome, like rock and roll. I equate you with the bandana, which you don't have on
Yeah.
today. That
Should bring it
I
back.
haven't seen you in it for a while.
I know.
But
I should bring that back.
yeah, you should. But so it looked really fun. It looked really easy. Tell me what it was like for you during those days that I'm talking about, where all we saw was you on the podium getting your medal, in this very, it almost looked cavalier way, just like I'm here and I slayed it again. Tell me what that looked like for you.
I'm glad it looked like that. It definitely, and I think that there was absolutely moments in time where it was like that, exactly as you explained. It came with somewhat of ease. I was in an incredible flow state. I was peaked in terms of my physical and mental performance. But I do believe that there was a lot of, you got to imagine, this is like 4 years are in between the Olympic Games. And there's not a single day that we're not thinking about the next 4 years
Yeah.
of what that path looks like. So you can imagine all of the thousands of conversations that we have in our head every day and every minute. And a lot of times it's not the nicest or the healthiest of conversations with
Mm.
oneself. So I've used the metaphor of like, you can either choose to live in the prison between your own two ears, the world's strongest prison, and it can paralyze you and restrict you and limit you from truly accomplishing the things that I believe everyone can. Or you can utilize and use those things and metabolize those failures, shortcomings, insecurities, whatever they might be, into things that can actually propel you. I think first it's a challenging process, right? I don't know a single person in the sport world or in the business world who hasn't had a harsh period of life. I don't know anyone. And it's, I think, within those experiences, right? Those scars that really shape us, give us perspective, and pain is still pain, no matter which view you are viewing an external or someone else's pain from. It's still pain, and it really takes hold of a lot of us, right? At our DNA level, I'm a firm believer in that, and so I think I think a lot of this comes down to, like, when I think about in the past, like what was actually happening in my head, there was a combination. There was times when I was incredibly like in flow and I was happy and it was effortless. And there's times where I was really, really unhappy, not with the results per se, like with myself. And so it was this real disdain for myself that existed for a long time. And I still battle this, by the way, today. Like, it's not something that just completely goes away. I think I'm just much more aware of that voice in those conversations that I have with myself, right? As we are all humans. And so, but back then I was very harsh and critical, and there was zero empathy of any capacity. And because of that zero empathy in any capacity, I had zero vulnerability to show to most people. And so the smile perhaps that was there, at times it was very genuine and authentic. And there was probably other times where I was most likely in a lot of pain too.
Yeah. So you put it up, it's like kind of a front or protection, right? That smile when you were in pain.
Yeah, I think that, look, I think athletics and the Olympic path is unique because if you have these micro traumas that exist, and I'm assuming almost everybody does, you can use the outlet of sport in which to express that rage, anger, sadness, fear, whatever it is. When you go to the business world, it's really hard to channel that type of thing into the boardroom, right?
Yes.
Like, you can if you're very, very specific in terms of how you channel that, and it takes a lot of psychological training and work. But it's feasible, but it's really hard, and that's why this transition is so challenging for most athletes when they go from the identification as I'm an Olympic athlete, Olympic champion, to I don't really know what else I like or care about in this world. I actually don't know what the world has to offer. I have never been exposed to it, even at the ages of like early 30s. Can you imagine, like, you're in your early 30s or your late 20s, and the only world you've ever known is the Olympic path. Your best friends are in the Olympics. Your family has only known you to be in the Olympics. You've only seen the walls of the training center and the locker room and the ice rink. And then at the snap of a finger, now you're saying, like, well, I'm going to go into finance. And you're like, wait, I don't know anything about finance. I didn't study in school. I'm like 10 years behind the peers that are applying for the same jobs that I am.
Yeah.
So there's this very visceral, and you also feel like alien when you come home. You feel like, I don't know if anyone can relate to what I went through. And there's this kind of ego association with, like, you'll never understand, anyway, it's complex. And but that's why we're talking about it.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about. So I'm watching the Winter Olympics in Beijing, or I was, and I was watching a story about the conditions for the athletes in the hotel rooms.
Yep.
Where there was no food, the rooms were dirty, they weren't able to access, the things that they needed, and everybody there's no audience because of COVID. But I wanted to talk about the funding for Olympic athletes, and Michael Phelps had said the national team for swimming gets $1,700 per month per athlete. Is that right? Somewhere around there. You said that you're in debt every single year you competed. And I found that to be really surprising because my perception was that this was a very, very well-resourced, well-funded, elite group of athletes who basically had everything they could possibly want for because we want them to be the best. And, like, I was really surprised to find out that, like, he had a side job at some point. Talk to me about the funding, and did you ever have a side job while you were training?
I did have a side job. I think a lot of Olympic athletes have side jobs. The Olympic athletes are not subsidized by the government, so we're not paid a salary. If you reach a certain level of performance in your sport, you're given a stipend, right? If it's $1,700 a month or something. But a lot of that goes towards like external training that's not given to you from the national training program and team. So if you reach the status of being accepted into the national training program or the Olympic Training Center, you're right, Laura. We have access to amazing doctors and scientists and training programs and weight rooms and recovery centers and all that great stuff that you can imagine to build the super athlete that we want. That's the perk of being a part of a national training program. But if you seek outside technology in terms of maybe blades or equipment, additional training, external, deep tissue work or recovery, whatever it might be, it's all out of pocket. And I think a lot of athletes don't have the limelight that myself or Phelps had. Phelps made an absurd amount of money from being an Olympic athlete, as he should, because he has done he's done unbelievable things in the sport. But there is a lot of swimmers who we've never seen via the limelight of NBC that maybe have put in the actual exact or identical amount of hours into the pool and training that he has, or that I have, that receive no benefit, no sponsorship, no speaking engagements, no limelight, no pedestal, no platform in which to resonate outside of the traditional usage of social.
Yeah.
And so this is pre-social was my era specifically. And so you're right. Like the stress is tough. I mean, athletes are never going into the Olympic realm and world because they want to make money. If they are, it's a really poor decision. And most sports are pretty obscure, like short track speed skating. It's not like, Americans are watching the sport year round. They watch it once every 4 years. Maybe they'll watch like the World Championships or something once a year. But in a world filled with distraction, it's hard. And if you don't get the airtime of an NFL, MLB, NBA, there's no real true financial opportunity that exists. And so a lot of athletes are trying to actually fund both their university dreams, hopes, and goals, and also themselves throughout this process. And, you can imagine you're 27 years old or 25 years old. You've put off school because you want to dedicate everything towards the sport. And now you are figuring out that you don't have a job and you don't have enough funding to be able to perform your best. So you take a side job, which then detracts away from what you're doing. And again, it's different today because you see athletes that are actually in school, like we saw with Nathan Chen. He's like been a student, that's rare. I mean, I'm just telling you, that's really rare. Like nobody on my team who was performing at a decent level, as we would, at what we would signify as, was in school. Everybody put it off.
Wow.
Because when you started to falter in training, we just, we was like, oh, that's because you're not 100% focused on what you're doing. So it's the funding's real,
Yeah.
But we have a great support system. The USOPP, which is the United States Olympic and Paralympic Program. And they've done a really, really good job of supplying the greatest and latest of technology and support and resources associated with being your best. And now that is encompassing and including some mental health, a greater emphasis on the transition from athlete to post-athlete career. But it's a big topic at issue, right? There's not the same resources and funding that exists for professional sports that trickles down to the athletes particularly. And it's interesting,
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, and just piggybacking right on that, talking about mental health. So in The Weight of Gold, which is a documentary that features you and Michael Phelps and other Olympic athletes, it's a really incredible documentary. I was surprised I hadn't seen it. It's fascinating. So if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend it. But Michael Phelps, again, to go back to him, he talks about checking into treatment after having suicidal ideations. Was that anything that you ever dealt with?
No, I didn't. I'm grateful that I didn't have, but I did have exposure to that from friends and teammates that really suffered, and we didn't know what it was. This was like 2002, 2003, 2004. My roommates at the time would like, one of my roommates would like, I'm not gonna say the person's name, but would like, I wouldn't see him for like 3 days. And I was like, "Are you sick? Like, what's going on?" Like, he's like, "Oh, I'm just so tired. It like hurts to be awake, And just like, I was confused. I was like, "What? What's wrong with this guy? Like, what's going on?" And I think now we know that person suffered from depression, deep depression. It was really hard for him to get out of bed. And you think it's like confusing to a lot of people. Like, how could you be an Olympic athlete but like have struggles getting out of bed?
Right.
But it's very real. It has. They say like a bullet has no name, but this is no different. Doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter how physically gifted you've been. The prison between your own two ears is still the world's strongest prison.
I love that. Is that in your book?
It is. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's a really great line. So this is the depression that they talked about in The Weight of Gold, and that I've kind of heard you mention or the mental health or the mental health challenges around that, around being an Olympic athlete. Is it because of the siloed nature of it, because you're so insulated from the world, do you think? And then, because what I want to talk about next is, you said there's no pension, when you finish, there's no stock options, there's no monthly stipends, right? Anymore.
Well, there's stipends if you reach them, but when you stop, you stop. Right?
You stop, but after you retire, which
there's not like an NFL fund that exists for athletes. No.
Right. And most people retire in their 20s, would you say?
I would say in their late 20s, most people.
Late 20s?
Yeah.
So is
some
that
well into their 30s.
Yeah. But like, so that's still a young person, but it's not a teenager, right? So your childhood has been so much different than a typical childhood, right? Your teenage years are much different than typical teenage years, because the perception I had was that in between Olympics, you were kind of living a normal life, but that's not the case, or a typical life, right? You were still training the same way you've been training.
There's nothing typical around the Olympic path. The only thing that's typical is the fact that you are. I mean, we have world championships every year. We have 6 World Cups every single year. We have 2 or 3 domestic competitions and typically 1 like exhibition. So imagine we're competing every month, we're training every month, and we're peaking at 2 different times during the year. So there's like not even a week that goes by that we're not fully dedicated on a task and physically actual training. I think some athletes take a week off. I mean, there was many years where I trained 365. Like I would have recovery days, but
wow.
Yeah. And you can imagine, like, when you're in that mode, like it's hard to get out of that. So like when I see athletes today, when I saw them before they went off to Beijing, I just like, they don't want to do one activity in the day that takes them out of the routine. And it sounds like insane.
Yeah.
Right? Like what do you mean? Like, what's wrong with doing like an interview? It's like an hour. It's just an hour. But I know, because I felt it, and they're like, no, because that's going to mess up the rest of my day. I could be taking that hour, and we're always searching to replicate the greatest of feelings that we have, and they're so hard to do. Like Neo from the Matrix, right? That part where like everything is in slow motion.
Yeah.
Like we have moments like where we feel like everything slows down, where my 40-second race feels like it's 4 minutes long, and I can do anything I want in that race. And it only happens a few times during your career, but you're always addicted to pursuing that. And that's why you're like so like insanely focused on like the smallest of incremental routines and details to try to replicate that environment that gives you the best possible chance of having those flow states.
Right. Wow. So how old were you when you retired?
I was 27.
So 27. So you had spent 20 years preparing and working and performing at the highest level. And you were now looking at a new life, and whatever that looked like, you're going to tell me in a second, but I am friends with Shaquille O'Neal, who is a lovely man. And I remember when he was still on the Lakers, and he bought into the KFC, Taco Bell, Pepsi franchise.
It's awesome.
And yeah, it was awesome. But we were all like, why are you doing that? Like, your whole life is in front of you. You're at the peak of your career and blah, 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 blah. And he continued to do those types of things, which it kind of felt like selling out to us, honestly, at first. Like, or like greedy. Like he's going to become a spokesperson for here, and he already has all this going on over here. But now I see how strategic and smart that was for him to start while he was at his peak and start investing in things other than basketball. So your new book that's out right now is called Heart Pivot. And we talked about how Olympic athletes at times have a hard time pivoting, right? And entering the world as we know it, not the Olympic training, Olympic athlete, Olympic world. Because there's limited access while you're there. You just don't have the same kind of information or tools or education, right? So how did you pivot? What did you do? And what was it like for you when it was like, all right, now what am I going to do? And then talk to me about from that point until now.
So the first thing that happened was I retired by choice. And because I retired by choice, there was this uneasy feeling that physically I could go back to the sport at any time. I never said it, but I firmly believe had I never taken a break, I would have made 3 more Olympic teams. I would be competing right now at the Beijing Olympics in short track speed skating. And I would be on the U.S. Winter Olympic team. That's unequivocally, unless some weird injury happened, I believe that I could have done that. Would I be competitive internationally? I have no idea. But to know that you can do that was a little bit challenging. And then to decide internally, okay, I'm going to go in the opposite direction in a completely different way, and I'm going to pursue something that is unfamiliar. I was afraid. I was afraid of failing in this new environment. I had no idea what I was really passionate about. I didn't know what purpose was, how to identify with it. I knew I had to ask myself that question. And so I needed to explore the natural curiosities of life that allow you to figure out, like, what do you want to do? And so I said yes to everything. I'd spent a lifetime, of many chapters of my life before that saying no. I said no to everything. Nope, it doesn't fit in the wheelhouse. It doesn't make me stronger, faster, recover better. I'm not doing it.
Right.
And now I said yes to everything, every opportunity, every business, every partner. I said yes. And I knew that exploratory phase was really important for me. Win, lose, or draw, it didn't matter. It was having those experiences to see where and how I could immerse myself in the new environment because I was disadvantaged. Now, again, my identity that I had carried with me and I was married to was this Olympic champion and Olympic path, but I had to divorce away from that in a way that still gave me the best possible outcomes. And so I needed to extract only the attributes that made me who I was, the hard work, discipline, work ethic, all those kind of cool things, and then reapply them towards the next trajectory and phase of my life. But the internal conversation and mentally was really, really tough. And I had a lot of, deprecating thoughts and feelings and a lot of imposter syndrome of like not feeling like you belong in a room or you know what you're doing or people are just gifting you something because of your previous accolades or reputation.
Yeah.
So it was tough, it was really tough. But I know that going against the grain is where we could find the greatest amount of growth. And so knowing that allows us and allowed me to embrace the change and allowed me to ask the bigger life questions of what do I believe Apolo wants from life and what do I believe life wants from Apolo? Are those in alignment? I spent a lot of time reading history and kind of philosophical thinkers and authors around their own experiences of life, and that gave me some context. I started spending time with people who were much older than I, much more successful in a business setting, and then asking them the important questions, like, what do you believe a life is well lived? What does that mean to you, right? It's hard to answer because we get addicted to these like dopamine responses of FOMO and social and all this stuff. So it was a process, but I feel like every year that goes by, I'm becoming more ingrained and anchored into my true north. And that is today, if someone asks me like, well, what do you feel like your purpose is today outside of speed skating? I would say like, my purpose today is to help people. And I do so, by the way, not through like motivational speaking, which I do, not through like
Yeah.
executive leadership workshops, which I've done, but in my day job, which I'm an investor, right? And so I spend time with founders. I talk to them, especially young founders, and let them know that the road ahead is incredible, but it's also very rocky. And we need you to understand how to embrace those times when you have to hard pivot as well, how you have to learn what it is to fail fast, recalibrate, and begin again very quickly,
Yeah.
and to never stay down. So these are elements that I love and I became very interested in well into my retirement. While I was pursuing all these different businesses all over the world, I found that I sought the most fulfillment when I would see people actually light up and they were inspired and they felt like they could show up fully every day.
Yeah. Just taking it way back, why did you retire by choice? What made you do that?
So I had this blueprint for success in the sport. I knew exactly what it took for me to get there. But there was, there was like this feeling that like I needed to do something different. And it was time for me to go against the grain. I don't know how to explain it. I knew it wasn't time physically. Like, and I knew that because in 2012, when I was watching the London Summer Olympics, I was like, I should definitely come back. Like, this is like unequivocally a yes, a green light.
Yeah.
And then I said, no, like you made a decision. And as my dad said and texted me, he goes, when a big shipping vessel leaves the port, the shipping vessel can't go in and out and in and out of port. Once it sets the destination, it must remain on that path all the way. And then it arrives or doesn't, and it has to pivot in the middle. But very rarely should it be going in and out of that home place where it was. And when you do that, by the way, it's very hard, right? Like these shipping vessels, we call them VLCCs. They're massive, right? They're the ones that are like out there, like in Long Beach, and they're huge.
Yeah.
And they take a long time to move because they're so slow. And that's why when we set the course, it's very kind of like life, right? You may not get to the destination that you set, but at least you'll be able to go along that path.
Right. I think so. It feels like more intuitive, like you just intuitively knew without an explanation that maybe you could articulate to anybody then. And like you said, even though you were still at the top of your game physically, your intuition was moving you forward to another path, along with the decision that you made that this was going to be something that you wanted to explore. And maybe you didn't want to be stopped by fear. You already said you were afraid, but you didn't let that stop you from doing it. From how much time did you take doing kind of like those informational interviews with people that you admired or in positions that you admired? Was that like a year or two? Are you still doing it?
I'm still doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm very inquisitive when I spend time with a lot of my friends, and I'm just kind of curious how, like, I love the human behavioral elements that we become incentivized by, right? Like, meaning like what's driving us, what's pulling us, why we do what we do, why do
Yeah.
I do what I do? That is fascinating to me. And I love to be able to hopefully like learn from that and apply those lessons to my own life.
And then, so also you did the 8-week executive education program at Wharton, right? Is
I
that
did,
right?
yep.
It's so impressive.
I did. It was a
It's
really
so
fun program.
impressive. and people like want to bring you in to be an inspirational speaker, to be a motivational speaker.
That's right.
So you talked about that intuition. You knew that it was time. Was that part of your plan? Did you have an idea sometime, like when you were 12, 14, 15, that you would be speaking to people at some point to try to
No.
motivate them? No?
I had no idea. I had no idea. I did find it very interesting that, after I had won my first Olympic medal, and I remember I was in New York City on Wall Street, and I had just finished ringing the opening bell.
Wow.
Like, I didn't have a company. I wasn't going public. What the
so
hell am I
cool.
doing there? You
Yeah.
know? Like, it's just like this kid with like long hair and this like goatee.
Yeah. The goatee, I
And-
forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember when my father and I were leaving Wall Street and the stock exchange, there was this guy that was like sprinting towards us in like this full suit, right? He was like this banker. He comes up, he like looks me in the face and looks at my dad. He goes, I just have to shake your hand and tell you how amazing that it's been to watch you represent the U.S.
Oh,
And I was 19 at the time. I was like, whoa, this is different. Like this is
Yeah.
different than I could have possibly imagined. So my life had changed very early, but I had no idea those things would come my way. Like it,
Right.
it's just unbelievable. It's life that I've been gifted. It's really cool.
well, it's also, like it or not, you represent something to people. Like the fact that you were biracial is something. The fact that you got to bring your dad with you to ring the bell at the stock exchange. That's so like, who gets to do that in their lives? And like you said, without being a CEO or owning a company or being the major shareholder, you got to go and ring the bell and bring your dad, who had put in all this work, and believed to support you. That's just such a great moment. I'd love to see that in, like, it's very cinematic, that idea. And then the guy running up to you in the suit, and that's like the end of the scene. It's perfect, right? So a couple more things. Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, they took a lot of shit and some praise for standing up for their mental health during the Summer Olympics. What do you think could be done better for Olympic athletes? For if young Apolo was 12 years old going into that system, what would you have liked to have seen for yourself that would have better prepared you? One, supported your mental health, and then two, prepared you for life afterward.
Well, there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll try to answer them one by one. So, look, I think what happened with that gymnastics team, and by the way, like many people all over the world, not just that women's gymnastics team, and not just that specific, all these athletes that have suffered some sort of form of abuse. It's like horrific, right? Someone that's like deeply trusted, and so. I was just with Ali Raisman last weekend, and listening to her. I've known her from afar for a long time. I don't think she even knows, and I've just seen her grow, and I've seen her mature, and it's incredible that these athletes have still been able to reach that level of high performance and success while carrying with them that type of like darkness and trauma that existed. And it's so powerful to watch a Simone Biles go against the grain to say, it's not okay for me to perform right now.
Right.
And you may not understand it. And I'm still going to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have had the strength to do that, to be honest, because it was a non-starter in my career. It's like, look, man, you're a guy. You're going to go and compete. You're a warrior. You show no emotion. I don't really give a shit about how you feel. You're here to churn medals, and you're going to be a warrior and take no prisoners. Like that was embedded at a very young age through sports. And I think as we progress in society to one that's much more transparent, open, and inclusive around how do we talk about this in a way that redefines what the words strength and champion actually mean. And I think what we're seeing, at least what I'm seeing, is some really great CEOs out there are showing you can be extremely performant. You can be very focused on the bottom line, but you can also show that you're human. You can be an incredible Olympic champion. You can be relentless in your pursuit, unbelievable dedication and sacrifice, and you can show that you're human, and you can show those emotions, and you can unveil the vulnerabilities, and that in essence allows us to connect with those types of people and champions at a level that didn't exist before, because we would hoist, even myself, people would hoist me on this pedestal and say, you're different. I said, like, am I? Like, really? Like, we zoom out 1,000,000 years. Am I just another cosmic piece of dust on this planet? Yeah, I'm just like everybody else. It's the same thing. I chose something a little bit different, and my conditioning and experiences allowed me to be more obsessed maybe than others, but I'm not actually that different. Like physically, and some athletes like Phelps is a physical specimen. He actually is
Right.
supposed to be a swimmer.
Yes.
I don't think that I was supposed to be a speed skater. Like I think we kind of figured it out along the way. Like genetically, if you look at my testing, in terms of like my power output and all these kind of metrics on the baseline, I'm like in the middle or below the middle of the pack on my team, if you can think
Oh.
about that.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like some extraordinary VO2 max or some like unique ability. Over time, we were able to train my body to recover at a level that was just unbelievable. So
Right.
again, like that was my gift, so to say. So, and I forgot the other questions.
Oh, I was just
Sorry.
saying, what could have been done for you to have made your transition from that very,
Yeah.
like I said, insulated world out into the world easier? What could have been done for you?
I think as I look back now, I think greater levels of attention paid much earlier in my career. So 14, 15, 16, 17, every year, getting exposed to an environment that is completely outside the world of speed skating,
Yeah.
that's important. So we can start to curate some of those curiosities naturally and prepare the mind for when the abruptness is going to occur.
Right.
And then I think just actually having a transition program for athletes
Ah.
that starts at the earliest of stages
Yeah.
and help to hone and develop some of those fundamental skills associated with like living life, outside the world of sport. And I think that there's a way to strike a balance between extremely high performance and being all in on something, but also being prepared for what's next.
Yeah. I love that. And no such program exists now that you know of?
There's a program that was started by a friend of mine, T, who's in Colorado Springs, and it's called Pivot.
Ah.
But the funding is not, the funding isn't there. Like this is going to take multi-millions of dollars in order to develop structures and programs. Here's like how here's how I see it, right? You have a huge resource pool that develops this training program for athletes while they're training, mitigate mental stress, trauma, depression, etc., but also prepare them for the moment that they need to leave. The NFL has this, the NBA has this, they're surrounded by professionals, and they still have cracks and they fall through and they still
Yeah.
fail and there's still issues associated. But the programs are there. And then all of the Olympic sponsors that exist, and there's a lot of these are very Toyota, Salesforce, Delta. These are like massive organizations. We should have a pipeline and funnel as optionality for athletes when they retire. Here are some of our partners. Not only did you learn about the fundamentals that are required for you to perform in your life after the sport, here's some options for you. Do you want to go in this direction with Delta? Do you want to be a technician, engineer? Do you want to be
Yeah.
in tech with Salesforce? Do you want to be sales? Like whatever that looks like. I feel like it's a no-brainer, right? Because you
Yeah.
have the attributes for athletes that are passionate, they know how to work hard, they're relentless, they never give
Right.
up, all these great things that I would want to hire for my own company, right?
Sure.
In our own spot. I don't know, like let's make it happen,
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I love that. And it does. It seems like a no-brainer. Okay, my last question about that, because we're almost out of time, is are other countries doing that? Or is no one doing that?
Other
yet?
countries are slightly different, and again, like we live in an incredible country that's
Yeah.
very imperfect in many ways, but other countries, for example, when you perform very well in another country, like in Asia, for example, you're given, I think in South Korea, they pay you every month until you die.
Oh,
Something. They pay you something. Some sort
Yeah.
of, it's almost like a pension.
So there is a
in
step-
China.
yeah.
In China, I think it used to be like they basically give you a house for your family, and then typically you go into the world of like coaching and athletics. That's typically
Right.
what happens.
right. That makes sense.
But those are subsidized by the government, so we're different here, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to go and do this. And by the way, like a lot of like smaller countries and European countries that don't have like significant funding, or even like the Caribbean countries, like once you win or once you come home from the Olympics, even if you didn't win, you're just like there's no support, there's nothing,
Right. Right.
like zero. There's just
Yeah.
nothing there. So I can only imagine what that's like, and hopefully that
Yeah.
changes.
Hopefully, well, and maybe you're going to be one of the voices to create that change, which would be
That'd be great.
I would not be surprised at all. I saw you were skiing, right? In Park City a couple weeks last weekend.
I wasn't skiing, but I
where were
was
you doing?
there. I was there doing some. Basically, I was doing some work with Delta. During the Olympic time, a lot of the partners of the Olympics want to bring in previous Olympic athletes to talk about their experiences, and
Yeah.
obviously with my book and such,
Sure.
a lot of people want to talk about the book.
Do you still skate?
I haven't skated. I skated on a pair of rental skates
That's
in
weird.
December. It was very weird. They're very dull. It's like
Can you
skiing
imagine the
smooth.
guy that rented Apollo the skates? He's
Right.
like, dude, Apollo.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
all my friends in Salt Lake City, and they like gave me the skates and were like, just to let you know, these are like aren't very sharp.
Right.
I mean, I don't care. But I haven't like properly skated since February. It's been 12 years.
Wow.
2010
Wow.
February. Yeah, it's been 12 years.
That's amazing, and that's the month we're in right now. So it is that anniversary. Tell me, Apollo, what's next for you?
So my book Hard Pivot is coming out this month, and the goal is to just try to get that to as many hands of people as possible,
Yes.
and help people find their own path and their own purpose.
Excellent.
And I'll continue on that path, no matter which direction and career that I'm pursuing at the time. It's still the fundamental truth in my life.
Beautiful. And we'll put a link to your book in the show notes of this episode for anyone who is listening. They will click on the link, and we'll get a copy too. And I have a segment called On My Nightstand where I read for 10 minutes from something that I love. So perhaps I can read something from your book during that time and just help further get the word out.
Cool.
Yeah. Where can people find you? I know where they can find you, but
Yeah, you can
tell
find
us
me on
where.
all the social. You can website apoloohno.com, Twitter @ApoloOhno, Instagram @ApoloOhno.
Excellent. Your name has one L, which is different
That's right.
than, is it the Greek Apollo that has the two
Um,
L's?
That's right.
Yeah.
The Greek Apollo has two L's, and so does the shuttle that went into the,
Right. So
the
why
air.
does your name have one? What's the origin?
My dad tells me the story that he had a name book, and he was looking for what he wanted to name me, and he took AP and then LO, and then he used the O as a connectivity tool.
I get
That's
it.
that's what he says, and so it means to
That's
lead
it.
away from.
To lead away from.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow, that's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And thank you for this whole talk. You're amazing. I joked at the beginning it was going to be a 3-hour interview. I wish it could have been because I could have talked to you for so much longer, but I'm so grateful that we got to talk to you for this long, kind of in the middle of this thing with your book coming out, the Winter Olympics, and all of your various engagements. I'm so grateful you took the time out to talk to us, so thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Apollo.
I'm Apolo Ohno, and I'm the only one in the room with 8 Olympic medals in the Winter Olympics who's dedicating his life towards uplifting mental health and awareness.